everyone. We all know the software bill of materials, and we heard a lot about the dependencies today, etc. And there's also this new Cyber Resilience Act, and we're going to figure out what is about it and what's the relation and how we manage that with open source. Thanks, Francesco, for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, quick introduction on myself. My name is Francesco Negosanti. I'm working here in the headquarters in Zug of Siemens Smart Infrastructure. Moved to Switzerland 1 year ago. I previously worked also in Siemens Digital Industries and Siemens Energy. Here I'm supporting in cybersecurity topics a couple of business segments of the BU business product, particular automation and connected devices. I'm quite close to the regulation topic, not only CRA. I would say that we are quite busy with all these new regulations that they are coming out, and they are significantly impacting the business. So let's have an overview. Before, I would like to ask, who of you, or not too many in Siemens, never heard at all about CRA, or they heard about it, but they don't really know what it's about? Okay. So you heard it's good or bad, because it is it's quite complex discussion. It is an introduction because the topic, I think we could talk 1 year about this, right? And this is something that as many things are still under discussion, under clarifications, and still companies, not only Siemens, but all the companies are moving on with the discussion on the topic, because there is a lot to interpret while we wait for official guidance from the future standards and from the European Union. So let's have, first of all, a quick overview of what is Cyber Resilience Act. So let's say the cybersecurity regulation landscape at the moment, it is quite complex. There is not only Cyber Resilience Act, there is NIS2 directive that is impacting most of the industrial sector, and other regulations like Radio Equipment Directive, Delegated Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, plus some other regulation that they are not really cybersecurity, but they have some cybersecurity aspect into that. Cyber Resilience Act, it is a very, very important regulation. It is a regulation for products with digital elements. What does it mean? Basically, products that they have some component that is digital, they are affected. We will talk maybe a bit later. And what is the goal? Basically, it defines a series of essential requirements that all the products that you want to put into the market, they need to comply with, but it has also requirements in terms of processes. And then to fulfill processes requirements, you will have to work also on organizational requirements and tooling. So the goal in general is ensure that cybersecurity is taken into consideration in every aspect of the product lifecycle, yeah? From the planning to the design till the moment that the product is built and then handed over to the end user, to the customer, and then operated and maintained. Another very, very important aspect is the risk. Cyber Resilience Act requires that when you plan, design, and develop products, you first identify and then assess the risk, and you document all the risks. And it has quite a lot of work requested in terms of documentation. You need to provide clear instruction to the users. What does it mean? You need to tell to the users what is the purpose of your product. What is your intent, what they call the intended operational environment. It's something that we could discuss 1 week, because there is a lot of discussion going what is the intended operational environment and the foreseeable use cases. Because this is also the base of the risk assessment that you need to perform on the requirements. And then you need to tell, of course, to the users how they need to use the product, how do you need to harden, or maybe we should talk about the harden, because the Cyber Resilience Act, it has a requirement for security by default. So while in the past we used to write a lot hardening guide, maybe now we should write the hardening guide, right? Because you should provide products that as default, they are fully hardened, and then maybe you should tell the customer, look, this is how the product should be. And then if you go to change the settings, these are your risks because you are changing what I give you as security. And then if you go to modify these settings, these are the possible risks. Vulnerability handling, this is something processes requirement. You need to, first of all, you are not allowed. You need to check for vulnerabilities, and if you know that your products or your components that are inside your products, they have known exploitable vulnerabilities, you are not allowed to release. And you have obligation to report exploited vulnerabilities and incidents. First, you need to inform the customer, but you have also to report it to ENISA and your defined National Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. There is a lot of things ongoing in Europe to build a future vulnerability database managed by ENISA and the future platform where to report incident and vulnerabilities. And that has also significant impact in the business model because manufacturers need to define the expected lifetime of the product. And it requires that you provide security updates for at least 5 years and you handle vulnerabilities for 5 years or the lifetime of the product is shorter. But CRA is also telling we expect that many of the products, they have much longer lifetime, so you should be able also to support vulnerability handling in an effective way for longer period. So what are the timelines? It started everything in September 2022 when it came out, the first earthquake, the first draft, and then it generated a lot of discussion that they are still not finished. Discussion that happened with European Commission, a member of players of the market, Siemens as well, and also from the open source community. A lot of objections have been raised on the first draft, asking to change things. Some of the things were accepted by the Commission, some others not. For example, spare parts, now they are excluded, right? This was originally, they were included, now they've been excluded. Many of the players in the market, they wanted a longer transition period. Now we have a 36-month transition period. So we had in January what is the final text, almost final text is like the agreed text. March, it has been the first layer of approval from the European Commission. To be finally approved at all level, it takes, there's some bureaucracy. The final approval, it is expected in autumn, so should be becoming effective in, let's say, October, maybe a bit later, bureaucracy is a bit slow. It will come into effect 36 months after the official date of approval. So you have 36 months transition period, except for the obligation to report incident and exploited vulnerability, they will come 21 March. So let's say in summer 2026, you will have to comply with the obligation to report exploited vulnerability and incident to your national incident response team and ENISA, and from, let's say, fall 2027, it will come into effect. So it will be basically very clear line. It means from the moment in transition period finish, you want to sell, you want to put into the market a product that is in scope, you need to get your CE marking, you need to comply with all the product requirements and process requirements of CRA. So if you go a bit more in detail, which products are in scope? Software, for sure. Hardware, depends. Like if hardware has digital elements, does it have electronics inside, does it have firmware, then you are in scope. SaaS, depends. They are for sure in scope of NIS2 directive if who is making the SaaS product is critical important entities. In terms of CRA, it depends if the SaaS solution it is related to a product, and in terms of essential functionality, components are also in scope. So it means if you have components inside, third-party components inside your product, they are in scope. We will discuss a bit later, including open source component. The goals we discussed, we want to raise the cybersecurity level of all the products, address mainly manufacturer, but also for something distributors and importers in terms of if they notice non-compliance, they are obliged to report it to market authorities. Timeline, we discussed about it. Implementation is quite complex. There is this, when you take the requirement, the technical product requirement is depending on the risk. So everything I heard also about with the colleague from Red Hat discussing. So the first things when you design a new product, first things you should do, you should define what are the purpose of the product environment where you use the product, and then you should perform a threat modeling, right? Threat risk analysis. And then based on the risk that you identify, you need to assess and document how you implement the requirements for your product based on the risk that you assessed. And here it comes a lot of uncertainty because we are working for assumptions. Because what is coming here, the regulation will come into effect in 3 years. It will refer to European Union harmonized standards that don't exist yet. So SEN and SENELEC, they will work on that. Now they are working the Radio Equipment Directive one. Hopefully they finalize soon and get approved. And then they will start some of these horizontal standards. They started already working, but the market will require also some more vertical standards. So there are the requirements, but the requirements, like in most regulation, they are very high level. And then the guidance, it will come when they will be published, the harmonized standards, but at the moment they are still not available. So at the moment you have two options. Or you wait, but it's dangerous. Depends what's your product, what's your baseline security, right? If you have a product that is already good in terms of security, you can say, I wait, because then I wait to see what is the official guidance from the harmonized standard for that specific product. If you know that there is a lot to do, you start, and how you start? You start based on your assumption, based on the industrial practices and industrial standards. Obligation to comply with the requirements, obligation to document a lot of things from the risk assessment. Some of the things, they are public documentation, some other things, they are private, like architecture, all the software development or the general product development, lifecycle, software, bill of material. You don't have obligation to share with customer, but you need to have. Obligation to report incident and vulnerabilities. Now, we said that what's the impact on open source? We said that it's open source component, they are impacted. So we know the definition of free and open source software. So when it came out, the first draft of Cyber Resilience Act, it was written, so the Cyber Resilience Act applies when I place a product into the market over a commercial activity. So looks kind of good start, right? So if I don't do commercial activity, then maybe my open source product and the developers, they are not in scope. But then there have been a lot of discussions because like in many regulations, in the first draft, there was not clearly clarified what does it mean commercial activity, where are the boundaries. So it generates a lot of discussion. In terms of open source, there was an open letter wrote by dozens of open source foundations to the European Union, asking to modify things or provide clear clarification, because this regulation has very, very huge impact on all the industrial sector, including the open source. Basically, all the software market becomes now regulated, so you need to comply. It affects also, Siemens, for example, is a company that it does industrial automation, right? So in industrial automation, there are many things that they are historically doing a lot of old technology, and now suddenly it comes a lot of cybersecurity requirements that will push a lot of changes in the technology in a world where there is still a lot of legacy. So it's a huge impact on all industrial manufacturers. And software as well, and open source as well. Let's see how on the open source. So Some clarification, not all, have been provided in the final draft. So it has been clarified that it applies to open source only in the case that you are doing a commercial activity. Yeah? So let's say, first of all, let's say if you are a developer or an individual contributor, you are not affected by it. So you're not responsible for the project. You don't have to worry. There was also the worry that if you are someone that is involved, then someone could claim about vulnerabilities or defects in the downstream products based on the problem that you, or the work that was done by the developers. So what are the consequences for open source? Let's see that in general, what you need to do, due diligence. So let's say you have your open source software that then is used by manufacturer, put inside their products, and then it's their responsibility. Let's say that you as open source foundation or open source working group, you don't make money for it. You don't commercialize, but then of course at some point the product is taken and placed by a manufacturer into a final product. And then of course this final product is, the manufacturer wants to make money, so they want to sell it. What they need to do, they have obligation to do due diligence. What does it mean, due diligence? This applies to any components that you integrate inside your final product. It doesn't mean if it applies to open source, but applies also to any type of component, also not open source. So you need to verify that the product has regular security update. You need to verify that the product doesn't have known vulnerabilities. And likely you should do additional testing. This comes also some additional obligation. If you as manufacturer, downstream manufacturer, that detect, you do your own testing and detect that some of the components has vulnerabilities, you have obligation to inform the manufacturer of the open source component, and you should remediate the vulnerability. And if you find a workaround or if you find a patch, you should share. Yes. And of course, you need to report the vulnerability to ENISA and to the national authorities. Now, it is also some positive aspect potentially for boosting security of open source. In the text it is written, so you can expect now what you can expect in the market. So we are using now components from open source, for example, but also not open source from other companies. So if you are a manufacturer, you want to ensure that the component that you put inside your product, it is secure, doesn't have vulnerability. So you want to, for the future, you likely want to use trustable components. So, and it is not prohibited, for example, that in future manufacturers or even governments, they sponsor the security attestation. So this could bring for the future, could improve the security of the open source component, because your final customers that will use the open source component, they would like to have secure components. Yeah? There have been a lot of clarification, and here there will be in general a lot of clarification coming. There will be a feature upcoming, vulnerability handling standard, provide security updates as BOM. So in general, it's a big headache. It is a lot of work for all the manufacturers, and there will be some work also for the open source. There have been provided a lot of clarification. So we said we are open source components, they are not in scope if they are not related to a commercial activity. So what does it mean, a commercial activity? What, for example, so if you generate money out of it, it is clear commercial activity. But for example, what about if someone I get donation, or someone is sponsoring, right, in terms of financially or hardware. So it is not considered a commercial activity if the money that you get from sponsorization or from manufacturers or from donation, it is not used for profit purpose, yeah? And so I think the concept is kind of clear, right? If you get money out of it, it is a commercial activity. If somehow the money is used for not for profit use, then it's not commercial. Still another positive things, CRA, but it's still not clear, said clearly that future, and this maybe will come from the standards, that it will need to be taken into consideration the specific nature of the open source software development. So, what is an open source commercial activity? Of course, if you ask money for your product, but also, and I connect to what was said before, you have different business model. Maybe you don't charge for your product, but you charge for support services. Then it's a commercial activity. Or if you have other intention to monetize, right? So, for example, if you provide access to the platform for free, but then with the access come mandatory use of some other services that they are hosted in the platform, that they are commercialized by the manufacturer. But in general, let's say that the fact that you are hosting something on a repository doesn't necessarily mean that it is related to commercial activity. Now, there is one more thing. So there are basically, or you are a developer or you are a manufacturer, and then with the Cyber Resilience Act, they invented this role, a legal role of the OSS steward. What is the OSS steward? So let's say this applies for sure for the open source foundation. In specific case, we will have to see. So let's say that you are an open source foundation, you have multiple projects, that the goal of the project is then that these products that you develop as part of the open source foundation, then they are used by the manufacturer for commercial activities. Then basically you are providing here a sustained and systematically support for product development, right? Because you are supported financially by the manufacturers and you provide a systematic activity. And then it comes some obligation to the legal entity, basically. If you can think about, likely this is the OSS steward, in the end, legally is the entity itself, then they will have to nominate someone. This means that I'm a foundation that has multiple projects to develop open source product, and then they will be used by the manufacturers. And then I have obligation. I have obligation to appoint someone, one person or a group of people, because I have obligation in terms of defining a cybersecurity policy that foster the development of secure products and ensure that the vulnerability handling is performed. And also there are all the reporting obligation in terms of vulnerability. If you have an exploited vulnerability, first you need to inform ENISA and the national authorities. Second, you need to inform your customers. And in case you are asked, you need to cooperate with the market surveillance authorities. So here, open source software and CRA, there is, in general with CRA, there are a lot of open topics still in general, but especially for the open source. First of all, CRA talks everywhere about harmonized standards that do not exist yet. Normally, we know that, for example, if we take our field, for example, automation, we know Senelec started working on some of that, some others that will start a bit later. We will try also to participate on it. For the open source community never really worked with Sen and Senelec. So probably it would be better if they sit together, because otherwise, not sure how it ends up if someone else is doing a standard for you and you are not involved, right? Because then you will have to complain with that. Then there are always open topics. There is this figure of the OSS steward. I would say for me, when I read this, it is quite clear what does it mean for the big open source foundations, right? But where is the limit, for example, from a small group of developers, and when it starts to come the need that I need to nominate on as steward, because this brings a lot of work, right? So if we are a group of 3-4 people that they are working on a good idea, and then suddenly I think my job should be developing products, right? And then suddenly I'm hammered with a lot of work to ensure security compliance with regulations. We need to see where it's going, the discussion, yeah? And yes, and in general, I think the main topic now with Cyber-Resilience Act is understand, you can see that the requirements are very high level, and completely different products, they need specific standards. So also a specific standard for open source should be defined. And also other things needs to be clarified. When we talk about other products, it is quite clear what does it mean making the product available to the market. For the open source software, it needs to be clearly defined because of the way how the open source software is shared. Sometimes the open source software is shared in platform that they are not really, is not shared, is not put in the market in the European Union, is put in a common platform and everyone could download from there, right? So where is the border to say this software is put in the market or not? Yeah? So there are still a lot of questions that they need to be clarified, and but then. Question.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the presentation. Actually, I was involved a little bit in CRA, and I joined on FOSDEM the presentation about CRA, so what the open source community said and what the European Union said. And actually, that's still very much unclear when we talk about open source, because still the assumption of the European Union is that the open source communities do something. But imagine an open source developer living in China. Why should this person care about what the European Union wants? There's no answer. There's no answer from the European Union on that question. The second thing now, more related to Siemens, is that we need to have SBOMs when we incorporate commercial or, let's say, open source software into our products. Now, up to date, I've never seen a useful SBOM by any of our vendors. So my question is, who's taking care of this? And my assumption would be that the that your team is taking care of this. So you should find out who are our suppliers, and you should talk to our suppliers to make them aware of Cyber Resilience Act and to explain them what they need to do. Because the developers that we have, they don't know enough about Cyber Resilience Act. So is there already a plan to do that?
There is, in general, well, without saying anything restricted or confidential, because we are live, yeah, but yes, so we have projects ongoing. There are also global projects ongoing to address SBOM topic, and in general for the Cyber Resilience Act and compliance on specific products, we have ongoing activities that they are taking care. There is a global guidance and there is specific business unit or segment activities ongoing for review. Some of the topics, like processes, are handled more at global level because you don't want to handle a topic that something that you need to do the same way for all your business unit on this entire business unit, right? You want to handle globally, right? And that's come the SBOM topic, like it comes also topic about vulnerability management and incident reporting. We can talk offline if you want.
Thank you very much, Francesco.
Okay.